Cuba has fallen. That's the news that I am delivering to you today. It has been 15 days since the blockade had begun, where all oil for the oil dependent nation has been blocked. And though the Cuban government has tried to ration that as long as they can, the fact is they've just timed out. They've ran out of oil. So what we're watching right now is the complete collapse of the Cuban national energy grid. There are pockets of generated power for military bases and bunkers, compounds like that that don't help the people. For 95% of the population, over 11 million people are now without power, and that power is not coming back on. Our focus on this series has really been to highlight what's going on for the Cuban people as themselves, not just the melodrama that's playing between the Cuban government and the American administration. And over the past 15 days, the Cuban people have been living through what is essentially an apocalyptic scenario, but only kind of on the precipice. As of today, it goes full-blown apocalyptic in Cuba. We're no longer tracking blackout hours. We're now going to start tracking the survival metrics, water access, food spoilage, and of course, cholera outbreaks. This, of course, is because with the massive energy grid failing, sewage system sanitation processes have also shut down. So all throughout the country, there is sewage overflowing on the streets. That means that disease is essentially spreading. With no available clean water to 90% of the population right now, that means that the only sources of water that they have, especially without the ability to purify that water or boil it, what you're going to see is massive waves of disease hit over the next couple of weeks. Disease takes time to incubate. It's going to run through the population of 11 million people in a country 90 miles south of Florida. Now, there was an announcement by the Russians 2 days ago that they were going to be sending humanitarian aid in the form of fuel to Cuba, but yesterday, Russian state flagged tanker Academic Passion, declaring its cargo of humanitarian fuel was actually stopped 12 miles outside of Cuba and boarded by U.S. forces. So as far as anyone breaking the blockade, it looks like there is a kinetic stalemate that's happening right now. But what does that tell the Cuban people is that there's no help coming. There's no oil coming. But because yesterday of a massive fire in the most important oil refinery in Havana, even if oil did come in at this point, say a negotiation was made between the Trump administration and the Castro government in Cuba, the fact is there'd be no way to process any kind of oil. So there's nothing that the people of Cuba can do right now. They've been reliant on a failing infrastructure for too long. And now that it's shut down and the only way to process oil for fuel, at least the fuel that people use, there's no way out of this. There's no way out of this.
It's funny to hear how he describes the conditions in Cuba right now. I'm Cuban American. I grew up here. My family immigrated from Cuba. A lot of these issues, a lot of the wounds that we're feeling today in Cuba are self-inflicted. But I need you to understand that this is the circle of life. The mentality that it took to turn my home country into a communist Marxist wasteland is it's a mind virus at best. That type of mentality, you can vote your way into it, not vote your way out of it. It's something that has to die. But once that mentality dies, once the reinforcing government apparatus dies, once the enforcement put around it where they've dug in and they've accepted this mentality and this way of life in Cuba, this communist bullshit, it all must die. The administration, the people, they must be replaced with fresh new people. People don't understand why we hate communists, why we left Cuba. The reason we hate communists is because communists love the state. They don't want to be humans. They want to be slaves. Communists want the state to take care of them. Look at the United States. The entire American population, for the most part, let's be honest, they hate American black people. Why is that? American blacks love the state. They live off the state. They beg for a living. They lie. They complain. They scam the state for money. They don't want to work. They don't. They want to be taken care of. They want the state to be their parents. They want the state to raise their kids. That is something that was taught to them by the king of the communists in America, which is Martin Luther King. The entire world chooses to move to the United States. Now, we found out a lot of people move here and they get on welfare. But for the most part, a lot of people move here for the opportunity to work. When we come to the United States, we came here to work. If we wanted to live off of welfare in the state, we would have stayed on the island. So that's why you don't see a lot of sympathy for the Cuban country or the Cuban people, because once we come to the United States, well, we hate communists. If you look at the left and the Democrats, they want you to be a communist. Everything is to convince you that communist is the way. Communism is the way. In Cuba, this is what happened to us back in the 50s. They had a man named Fidel Castro, and he brought a communist Marxist revolution. What he did was the country's population is of dark-skinned people that looks like me, but my mother is white and fair-skinned. They convinced the dark people that the reason you're poor is because you're dark, and all the fair-skinned light people from Europe that live here, they're taking all of your money. They don't want to convince them it's anything to do with your work ethic, what you're doing, how you're building yourself up, the society at whole. No, no, no. It's all based on your looks. Sound familiar? It's literally the same playbook and the lies that blacks say here in the United States. And it's the same exact push for communism. They want you to give up everything you have because they compare themselves to you. And the fact that you can work and you can earn a living and you take care of your family, you give them a complex about themselves. That's why they push for equity. They want everyone to be equally poor so that they don't feel inferior. The problem is when darker people move here from Africa or other Caribbean nations and we work and we have families and well then all your excuses of racism they go out of the window and then people kind of see through them and they say I think you're full of shit because these people from Madagascar and Mozambique and Nigeria, they come here, they become doctors, dentists, they don't even speak the language. So how are they running laps around you native born blacks who are Americans, who have citizenship, speak the language, but here you are talking about racism and oppression 60, 70, 100 years after Jim Crow or whatever stories of the fake slavery. The reason we don't like these people here in the States is because they remind us of what we got away from. They use those same tactics in Cuba. They told the people that the cure to racism is communism. So what they did was they used the darker skinned people to start a revolt and to push fair skinned, light skinned, white looking Cubans out of the country. And what they did after that was they just dug in. They dug in and they solidified a mentality around communism based on your color, and they drove the country into hell for almost 100 years now, 80 years plus. The Bay of Pigs in the 60s, but it started before then. It started when before Celia Cruz even became a big musician. It was in the 40s and the 50s when the country was a prosperous nation. We're so close to the United States adjacent. It was a booming metropolis. It was damn near a suburb of Florida where all the people with money would go to get away. We had an economy. And the communists came and they took over the means of production. They stole everything. And all they had to do was get you to fight for them by making it based on your insecurities about your color. We're fighting black communists in the United States right now, every single day. And all they want to do is tell you about their color and, oh, I'm black, I'm black, I'm black. And it's just the same playbook, but it's old. Jesse Jackson's dead now. He told them that they're Africans. Never been to Africa, don't speak an African language. There's literally people that migrate here from Africa. Those are actual African Americans. Elon Musk is a fucking African American. But you got these other people that have already been here, speak the language, never been anywhere else. They're convinced otherwise. I say this to say that mentality doesn't change. It has to die. And unfortunately, the people who push it the strongest, they have to die along with it. There are younger people who are going to be smarter, who are going to be free thinking, who do not want to be slaves. They're going to have to replace those who die. This is natural. There is no, oh, we're going to come in, we're going to save the country. Save the country, unfortunately, has to die to be born again. That mentality of communism, of being a slave and to love your slavery and to embrace your slavery because you think that slavery is actually an escape from racism. And they're trying to convince you that here in the United States, they would rather be they'd rather you look at them as a black than a person. And they want, and that's all it came down to back in Cuba too. That was it. That was it. And we lost everything. Everything. People are, oh, he's like, oh, it's apocalyptic. To an average American, it's been apocalyptic for 30, 40 years now. We're always teetering on the verge of having new diseases, trash, waste. You think it's a well managed and run country with an embargo for 60 years? And if we didn't have the embargo, then what? Then they'd be smuggling in weapons and then trying to attack the U.S. It wouldn't be any different. It wouldn't be any different. It wouldn't be any better. The embargo was just the beginning. But they should have been choked out this mind virus long ago. It should have taken this long. It has to go.
State-run internet and cell service has essentially gone down. The only way of having any kind of communication in Cuba right now is through amateur ham radio operators and whoever was able to smuggle in satellite phones before the blockade actually happened. Now, the U.S. victory of enforcing this blockade has really come at a massive diplomatic cost at a time where diplomatic tensions across the world right now are incredibly fractured. The only support from another nation that the U.S. has had on its actions in Cuba has been Israel. And with Cuba looking like it's going to be America's Gaza in the Western Hemisphere, I doubt there's going to be any support coming from anyone else. Now, the UK has remained silent, but France and Spain have issued statements.
That's a rather pathetic comparison. Cuba would never be Gaza. There's no terrorist organizations that are even alleged to be attacking the United States from a distance. We've kind of let bygones be bygones. They've been over there, we've been over here. The Cubans that have come to the United States, came here to be Americans. The ones who remained, they embraced communism. The ones who tried to escape wanted to work and provide. The ones who stayed, they want the state to provide for their families. They want to be taken care of. They want to be slaves full time. But the problem is the mentality of slavery, it's unsustainable if there is not a certain level of demanded labor that is there. So unless these people are being put to work in some form of fashion where there's an industry that is benefiting from their labor, you're not going to be able to sustain this whole lifestyle of slavery where the state is the means of production. If you're not producing something, you have to have a GDP. You cannot have a slave population of dependence on the government or you're depending on tourism. The slaves must work. Famously in the United States, it was cotton. And in islands, we had sugar cane, we had plantains. There were fruit. It was goods that were harvested with the labor of the slaves. Right now, unless you're going to have to put the entire remaining communist population to work, allowing people to just live indefinitely where everything's free. They don't have to pay rent. They don't have to pay bills. They don't have to pay electricity, and everyone gets a stipend every month. You get a coupon. You get to go to the store. They give you cheese. They give you rice. They give you a certain amount of meat and seasoning, and then you go home and you stretch that out for a week, 2 weeks, sometimes a month, and then you come back with a voucher. It's reminiscent to the government cheese of back in the day. Our country's parallel. We're just on a macro scale. Cuba is really Memphis. Cuba is Baltimore. Cuba is what the west side of Chicago. These blue cities have these communist enclaves where there's a communist utopia that is paid for by taxpayers. So you get to live in your communist utopia of subsidized housing, subsidized food, subsidized everything, basically welfare. You get all this free stuff from taxpayers like me, and you get to live in your neighborhood. We have to pay for it. If you had to pay for it on yourself without all the government assistance, you wouldn't be able to live there. It has to shut down eventually. We cannot keep living like this. It's unsustainable. Now, again, Cuba is basically one of these blue cities. You can't change the lifestyle. Why do you think they invented the vaccine? That mentality must be euthanized. It must be removed from the board because it's contagious. I've never seen it go the other way. I've never seen a slave convince a free person that they should be a slave. But I've seen a free person convince a slave that they should want to be free. But I'll be honest with you, for the lazy, average Gen X American who has these mental issues where you believe in racism, or you believe that you're in the wrong body, or you believe you have some kind of gender dysphoria, you believe you're trans or gay, they have a built in handicap. It's a mental illness. Those people do not feel like they can work in the world. They tell us that, they illustrate it. So for them, they're going to need to be taken care of by the government indefinitely. They're going to want to be there. They want to be slaves. They're never going to go out and get a job and have kids and pay rent and pay a mortgage and become a part of society. There's always going to be a detriment there. They're going to blame any issues they have on the state. They want to be slaves. The problem is, slaves and free people, we don't mix because you're not my equal if you're my slave. There's no way I'm paying for you to live, but we have an equal say. We don't. It's more of a parent-child scenario than an equal scenario. We're working that out here in the States right now. We're actually making progress thanks to the vaccine, thanks to Jeffrey Epstein's research, with the efforts of Bill Gates and the influence of Kamala Harris. We were able to inject the poor population, the population of people who want to be slaves. They were injected, and it was created for them with Epstein's research. We're mitigating the damage done by them, and we're actually going to bring down that population. It's dropping every single day in the U.S. People don't like to hear it, but that's what's happening. In Cuba, if that's what the goal of the blockade is to cause damage to the communists that they're not going to survive the next 2 months, because it doesn't take very long to starve out people or to push people to the brink of losing everything. It doesn't take much time of not having power, because without electricity, you don't have running water. Without running water, you can't get rid of waste and feces, and then you got all the issues. It had to eventually be done, but this was something we could have prepared for. Everyone knew the rules. Everything in this hemisphere belongs to the United States. There was no such thing as any country that can flirt with another major superpower here in the U.S. Everyone saw what happened to Venezuela. They made it very public. Mexico and Cuba are on the menu. The Cubans had time to prepare. You either failed to prepare, you prepared to fail, whatever it is. You weren't ready, but that's no one's fault but yours. Trump is basically doing the hard part. He's just getting it over with. We want Cuba to be a part of the United States. We want Cuba to be stable. But the people in Cuba have to learn to work. They have to learn to be self sufficient. They have to learn that depending on the state to give you free housing, free food, that can no longer be a thing. Oh, but that we don't want to live like that. That's too bad. The option of being a slave is only reserved for certain people in certain situations. You can't have a whole country full of slaves. It doesn't work. Communism does not work. It doesn't. Only in small demographics. 11 million is not small. 30,000, yeah, you can build a commune. You can build a district somewhere. Everyone, what is this? To each progression is to each's need, or you guys can apply it there. The problem is there are going to be people that are going to hold out who are not going to work, and you're going to have to be their slave because you're going to have to make up for their labor for what they don't want to do. Now you're going to have to do, but they're going to still want equal access to all of the whatever is yielded from the efforts, and that's not fair. It's going to be a problem. So it doesn't, and in a small, and like I said, in small communes, small enclaves, you can figure it out, but it doesn't work on a large scale. Cuba's going to have to die in a certain, and the communist Cuba is going to have to die in its current state and be born against something greater. And by greater, I mean something that's free. There's no master anymore. We can have elections. We can choose leaders in Cuba. We can choose people who are going to help us manage. We're going to learn how to budget. We will learn how to pay for expenses, live within our means. We will learn how to build industries. Everyone cannot just live off the government, and you're not allowed to talk to the locals because you can spread capitalism to their mind and then they'll spread it to other people. This whole thing where you don't work and someone else takes care of you is poison. And over here in the US, they're trying to poison you and your kids every day. Now your kids are coming home and saying, well, we have all this money for war. Why can't the government just give us money every day? That's what the kids are asking their parents now. And we thought we got through that in the 50s, and it's making a resurgence. People want to be slaves at extreme rates here in the US because they don't understand what comes with it. What comes with that is we have to reduce the population. If you want to be a communist, we got to get rid of millions of you, millions for it to work. But you can sustain yourselves, learn to be independent, learn how to be free. And then we don't have to do that. And then you can live. But death is the only thing that communism has to offer. Why do you think Kamala Harris and Biden, why do you think at their campaign rallies, all they offered you was abortion? All they offered you was a killer vaccine for a virus that didn't exist. They Death is the only thing they can offer you. Nothing else. Hopefully, we're going to be able to choose freedom after this, and we'll have better new leaders, younger people that are going to step up. But the old ways of using racism as an excuse to be a lazy, those days are over in Cuba, and hopefully they're going to be ending here in the U.S. as well.
Being a grave concern. But UN Security Council meeting is calling to condemn the U.S. actions because it's leading to a mass starvation of people. Now, be assured that if that's what this leads to, which it most assuredly will at this point, because even if you bring in food, there's no way to cook it. Even if you bring in oil, there's no way to process it. This would be the largest humanitarian crisis that is now happening here in living history on the Western Hemisphere. And it's caused by the American government, the American military, and the Western alliance is completely fracturing over the morality of this siege. So to summarize this all kind of on day 15, the countdown is officially over. The national energy grid is down. The island of Cuba has gone dark. The escape routes are closed, and the superpowers are in a kinetic standoff at sea.
And the problem is, you cannot import Cuban people to a country unless you are going to make them your slaves and you're going to feed them and house them for free forever. In their current mindset right now, You cannot take the average communist Cuban and just repatriate them to another country. It never works. Why do you think we're all just huddled in Cuba, dark and dancing? Because there's nothing else that we can do. You're importing a liability. The only thing you can do for a Cuban that's dark in Cuba right now is bring them to the US, put them on welfare, put them on WIC, put them on Section 8, and let them just live out the rest of their days being cared for by the American tax dollar. We can't do that. We're going to have to stay in Cuba, and it's going to be a sink or swim scenario. If you don't work, you don't eat. That has been the way, that has been the number one mentality of a human since the beginning of time. If you don't work or produce, then you don't eat. And if you don't eat, you starve. As a person who is free, freedom has responsibility. It's up to you to also be able to feed your own kids and feed your own wife and to feed your own self. Not to be a dependent, not to be a slave of the state. That's why I said that mentality and people who think like that will have to die along with Cuba. And then something else can be born again, a new way of life. But those people who refuse to work and they just want to sit around all day, they hustle a little bit, they sell soda, they sell candy, just a little bit enough money to get by. That's not good enough. God did not give you the gift of life for you to just waste it on just withering away and relaxing. We must contribute. We should want more. That's why a lot of us left Cuba because we wanted to be able to determine how much we earn and what we can produce for ourselves. Everyone's not the same. Some people will work harder than others. Some people are willing to work longer. Some people are willing to work smarter. We're not all the same, but you're going to have to do something. Sitting around and expecting me to pay for you and your children is not a strategy. That's you scamming me. That's why the whole system in Cuba has to go. And the systems here in the US, they're being broken down every day. I've seen abuse and beautiful news. They said we no longer allowed to use EBT to buy candy, soda. You're ripping the communists to shreds because now they're going to have to earn money and work to afford the things they want. Independence is the key to the United States. If we wanted to be socialist like in Europe, you see the Europeans don't produce anything. Why would they? If they do make any money, 90% of it is taxed to cover social programs. What are social programs? Programs that basically take care of others, especially when they're coming from other countries, so that they can just live for free at your expense. That's not enjoyable. Nobody wants to live like that. So that's why, again, the country has to die and then it can be rebuilt into something better. It can be reborn. It will be. And that communist attitude, that communist mentality, you can have it, but you're going to starve to death. You're going to have to learn to work. It's going to take time, but it's possible. And if there's an injection of Cubans that will be able to return back to the island, we'll do the heavy lifting. We'll rebuild and we'll get our people in order. And you can be mad all you want, but if you're hungry, there's only so much you can do. So you're going to have to figure it out. You're going to have to get over that communist bullshit.
This is not a good place for Cuban people to be. And there is essentially nothing going on American mainstream media when it comes to coverage of this. And I think that that's on purpose. It was easy to seal off Cuba. And it's easy to make sure that nothing's coming out of Cuba. And you are seeing videos all throughout Latin America, all throughout Central and South America about what's going on in Cuba. It's just not in America. You're seeing it in Canada, not in America. This is a media blackout that's being done by our mainstream media. The only voices that are talking about what's happening in Cuba to the Cuban people. They don't care about the government. I don't care about whether they're communist, anything like that. I care about people and the fact.
And yeah, let's go ahead and correct that, sir. All people are not the same. You cannot care about communists because communists don't care about themselves. That's what we would call a fool's errand. If you are more concerned about certain people than they are about themselves, then you're wasting your time. Americans do not like conservatives or Republicans. The media is completely owned by the left and controlled by Democrats. Cubans come to this country to work. We hate communists. So no, you're not going to hear anything about Cuba on the mainstream media. You're not going to hear anything because we're not their voters. Cubans will vote for them. Salvadorians, people from maybe Colombia. No, actually, no. Colombians aren't even communists and Democrats. Maybe some people from El Salvador or Honduras or Guatemala. But no, the rest of Latin America is the only thing that's going to be left in Latin America is going to be people who despise the communists and they're not going to promote helping them or what's going on in their country. Besides, we wouldn't leave our countries if we could work and make money in our countries. A lot of but for the most part, a lot of Spanish people we do come here to take advantage of the social services and be slaves. We want to be taken care of by governments, free stuff, free benefits. All we got to do is vote for you illegally. That's fine. That's a good trade. But we're removing those that method of scamming, all that fraud. We're getting rid of it. So people are going to have to stand on their own. So no, you're not going to hear a lot about this from Cuba, about what's going on in Cuba. And he's saying it doesn't matter. It does matter. That's all that matters. If you're a certain type of person, they're going to be trying to bring you over here as fast as possible. And if you're not, they're going to ignore you. You don't see any huge push to bring a bunch of people from, countries that hate communists. You're not going to see them. There's not a big push to bring them over here. There isn't. There isn't. They'll push them right back on the boat and tell them, okay, good luck going back. They don't want them here. And I don't blame you. The only people you should want in your country are people who want to work, not people who want to freeload. Again, it got so bad in the United States, they literally euthanized an entire race of people in this country because they're seen as being freeloaders. Maybe not all individuals, but when you're 90 something percent of your population is on welfare and still talking about slavery hundreds of years later, that means they're never going to break that mentality. That mentality has to die, it has to die out. And then new people will be born without it. That's literally what they had to do here. So they're definitely not going to bring in new people with those same mental issues. That's why you see Cuba just basically standing by itself and falling on its own.
The fact that we, as Americans, by our silence, are condoning 11 million people being thrown into an apocalyptic scenario where they're deprived of food, of water, of healthcare, where children are becoming casualties, where the elderly are becoming casualties, anyone with chronic illness are becoming casualties, and soon the young and the healthy will also become casualties as disease runs through the population, as the lack of clean water or the absence of water altogether throws the people into absolute shock and a state of.
I'll be honest, people are happy in Europe because it's not because of the economy, but it's not because of all the social services. And I'll be honest, I don't think everybody is truly that happy in Europe. The fun part about Europe is that you can get on a train and you're connected to 15, 20, 30 other countries by maglev. You can just be in another country. It's not very expensive. Health, there's a lot of free services there. But the people who are paying for those services, they're not seeing the fruits of their labor. I don't see them being happy. And a lot of Europeans move here to the United States because they're not happy. The people who don't leave are those who are benefiting from basically living as slaves, where they're dependent part-time slaves. They're being subsidized, which is a form of slavery as well. The state is giving you money to live. Statist. Yes, they are going to say how happy they are because they're benefiting from people who work for the rock. But those Europeans who are tired, well, they repatriate themselves, come to the United States, and they actively work against communism and communism. Socialism is just the political form of communism. It's all basically removing the responsibility for oneself, putting the burden on the state and on others. No, they're not happy about it. They want to work and build businesses and do work and take care of themselves. A lot of them have moved to other countries. They've moved to the United States and they've started doing business here. But those who benefit off of living from the state, the difference is also in Europe. You guys are at a negative birth rate, depending on your skin color. So just to keep your society going, yes, you've had to mass migrate people from Northern Africa, Kenya, and you brought them all to those countries, and they have their own separate enclave. They never became citizens of that country. They have their own separate communities. They live in their own separate worlds. Even your police can't even go into their neighborhoods. But you were so desperate for warm bodies that you brought these people in. And now your countries are in recession that you'll never be able to get out of, and you deindustrialize yourself. You don't have any industries anymore, but you have a bunch of angry, radical Africans in the country that basically wipe out anyone who's white or anybody who's pretty much been invaded and taken over. Here in the U.S., we chose a different route. We voted for Trump. So we're not going to let that happen. But if you want to see the results of X amount of time of living like a communist, Cuba's a perfect example. And we're going to just have to stomp it out. There's two ways you can do things. The hard way. Cuba's going to have to go the hard way. It's tough love, but the people will have to learn. You don't work, you don't eat. Dancing and doing art and just hanging around all fucking day for 1,000 years until those days are over. Everyone's going to have to contribute. That's the way it has to be, or you're going to perish.
Survival. Now, the hope from the U.S. administration is that this kind of pressure that was put on the people would force the population's hand to confront the government. But the fact is, the people have been thrown into a state of survival almost immediately.
And that's exactly why this had to go this way. Literally, they're forcing the people to look at the government and say, what have you done? How are we going to trust you when you can't protect us? And then you find out, well, our government of communism was depending on the Russians. We're depending on the Chinese. So you don't even have, so you're keeping your government as a slave to another fucking government. You don't even have your own independence. Cuba has products. We used to have a huge sugar industry, huge banana industry, huge vegetable industry. We used to export. It's all gone. The means of production taken over by the state. It became unfeasible. Everything had to shut down. And then everybody became a dependent on the slave state. But guess what? At least you didn't have to worry about racism. Oh, yeah, because all the white people with money are gone. So you feel better now? You're poor as fuck. You're a permanent loser. But at least you don't have any white people to look at to compare yourself to. And that's what makes you happy. That's what you take solace in. You should be ashamed. That's why it can't survive. It has to go.
That's how fragile the Cuban system actually was. And the Black Berets did their job. I mean, listen, they went from securing energy resources, securing fuel and food sources, to quickly cracking down. There was only two real protests that have happened this entire time. And what happened is exactly what you think would happen. Provocateurs were arrested and disappeared. And the people know, and they understand that even if the government falls, there's no immediate change. So we'll keep following this and let you know what's going on as the situation continues to degrade in Cuba. But we appreciate your time and your attention on this one.
Now this is when this will change. When the government collapses in Cuba officially, there are going to be a few people that are going to step up and say, hey, we want to work with the United States. And they're going to beg President Trump to come in and help them. And they're going to tell him that we're going to need protection. We're going to need security. And we, the people, are going to be asking Trump for protection and security. And Trump's going to give us all the military aid we can ask for and then some. And those who want to be communists, those who want to defend the communists, those who have pretty much dug in generation after generation of communists to protect the Castro regime, the U.S. military will turn them into dust and they will put them in small boxes and send them to their families. This is going to end in death, one way or the other. And eventually Cuba will be reborn again and we will rise. But we're going to have to crack some eggs to make that omelet. Slavery will end in Cuba. Glamorized slavery by calling it communism will end in Cuba. Cuba will be a country that will be a vassal of the United States, will be influenced by the United States, but hopefully we'll have a constitution and we'll have certain things that will protect us from ever falling back under communism. But we're too close to the United States for them to pretend that they can just leave us to ourselves like they did before. If anything, we would be lucky if they turn us into a Puerto Rico. Like and subscribe, share the video. I'll be back on with some more opinions in about 20 minutes. Remember, it's America first and America only.
I've been needing to find a new apartment, which has not been easy with credit as bad as mine. Luckily, I found cosigning.com. They connected me with a cosigner who helped me get my dream apartment for me and my dog. I just paid a small fee and was able to move in fast. Get the cosigner you need for the apartment you want. Check out cosigning.com today.